Hello, hello. Tonight I'm going to talk about and feel into the idea of the floating suspension of bones. That bones are not, for the most part, like really pressing against one another, but they're suspended in webs of connective tissue and fluids. Webs of connective tissue and various pockets of fluids. And there's an old Zen image. And that is a book I've been meaning to get for years. And Eric actually in Dynamic Alignment quotes this book, and it's anatomical images for Zen meditation. So to kind of, because a lot of Buddhist meditation is about feeling the body and recognizing it as it is, seeing the body for its bones and its mucus and its blood and its snot and its everything, and then detaching from that, right? That would be like the Buddhist path. And so Eric talks about this image that's, I should even look that up. Let's see. I think it's in the first edition. This is the first edition. He's got such good bibliography here. There's so many really cool books. I've looked at or read a lot of these, and some of them I still haven't. But I always forget what a good, like wild, interesting take at the body his bibliography represents. Here we go. Masunaga, Zen Imagery Exercises. And I think it was, oh, he doesn't give me a page number. Shoot. Anyways, it was something about being a bag of bones, like being a sack of like organs and bones that are all floating around in a sack. So I'm going to start with that image, that I am this buoyant, tubular, fluid-filled structure, right? Almost like a shaped water balloon. And there are different viscosities of fluids and different flows of fluids throughout, and there are membranes and layers, and there are things with more or less density, and it's all just sort of like in a sort of flux inside, but also a balance, right? Homeostasis. Oh. People are mad at me. I can feel it in my body. It's really hard. It's like I just have to keep moving through that stuff. It's interesting. Like as I sit here and feel my body, it's like I can feel like the tension patterns and the thoughts and like the images arise, right? And it's like, okay, even this is what it is to be a body. Even this is what it is to be in my experience, in a conception of the now. I'm going to be self-reflective tonight, I think. It's really hard. Like, I feel like to just exist kind of as you want or as you are around people. And I mean, in some sense, that is like the socializing process, I suppose. And in another sense, it seems like we should be able to be ourselves among people. I mean, act as we wish and like not, I don't know, like how do you draw those lines, right? I think questions of like property and ownership really end up being like what makes things difficult. That's why I wonder if, like, is it even possible to get where I want in my body and like really be a sort of modern day believing capitalist, which I feel like I am, you know, and I don't know, that's just a different body, I guess, or that is a body, but still it feels like there must be a way, like, just to be with people as you are. And I mean, maybe that is the way, but it often feels like when we are just kind of being what we want, and like people oftentimes kind of like, it seems polarizing in a sense. You know, I think about watching that 5'2" documentary about Lady Gaga and how she, so as I'm talking, by the way, I'm using the imagery and I'm like feeling some of the muscles and I'm like feeling the bones like as suspended from one another, right? Like that there are space and then I'm this bag and fluids and solid things, right? So a little more explanation if you haven't like watched my methods or know what I'm kind of doing here. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think our very society is just like not taught us to do it. It often feels like there is a sort of blending or harmonizing that has to happen to be in proximity to people, or yeah, in any sense, proximity, right? Like even conversation over the internet is proximity in some way, but there is a like a blending, it feels like, that happens, and you can feel that person's, you know, like their ideas, right? Like, for instance, like somebody expresses an idea, it has not only a cognitive, sort of visual, creative map to like make it happen, but it has like an embodied sense, right? A kinesthetic translation of the idea for each of us. And sometimes I think that, well, I actually say this a lot, but I often think that feeling is public. That feeling is the most public thing we do, and a lot of times we're kind of repressing or not wanting to feel our feelings because people around us kind of know or can feel it or can like read it on us in like the really subtle ways we're able to read one another's neurology, you know, just like instantly, you know, if someone's having a good or bad day, especially if you know them. But sometimes it does seem like that we're sort of like blending our feeling, and that is community. And by doing that, we create like a, you know, a new morphogenic field, or whatever you want to call it, a new place to be. Like I go out partner dancing a lot of times on Friday nights, and there's this really interesting vibe in the room, and you can feel it, and you can see how the dancers in that specific room are not dancing like anyone else in the world. And to be in that room is to be in that vibe, and it affects you, right? Just the way, just being around people, the other people who are moving, it affects you. And this is something I've started to really think about in the past 2 or 3 years, the way that, you know, the places you go, the things you do, the people you're with affect you in that sense. And I think a lot of us don't want to be affected. I think a lot of us have been told it isn't safe, or have experience of it not being safe. Or I think there's a lot of reasons. People think it's, I mean, I do believe there is such a thing as codependence, right? But people think it's instantly like codependent or something in a negative way, but they perhaps don't, and maybe I'm just talking about myself, but perhaps people don't like, yeah, just really understand or believe in the nature of what I would call relationship, this blending thing, right? And the question is, how harmonious is the blending? I think a lot of people define their relationships by the points that are not harmonious. Maybe we all do that in some sense, I don't know, because there is a flow. I mean, maybe it's all just a continuous sort of spectrum, a continuum of experience. But I don't know. I wonder. I feel like in modern 2017, it's really hard to like have friends. Like, I know a lot of people, I know a lot of sociable people, but time and again, people like reflect to me. They're like, wow, I can like talk to you about things that I don't talk to anyone else about, you know? And I always feel like it's really hard to get there. It's like, oh, like I can talk about things then with like a lot of people about a lot of deep things. So I get confused. I get really confused because I'm like, I don't actually think like I know something better or anything. I just think I don't know. I don't know what I think. Like, I don't know, because I hear people reflect that, and I don't know if that's like, you know, maybe they have different sorts of depth connections with people. Maybe it's just that specific way. Maybe that's just, you know, some of my gift is words. So, just leave it. So now I've stretched into, you know, first I started doing the calves, just like a light massage, kind of an awakening, an activation, feeling the tibia and the fibula. Then I went to feeling the femurs a bit and started stretching into my hip sockets, just feeling that. And then I was feeling the rocking of the pelvic halves on the femur. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to the spine. I was just focusing on lower body. And as I got through all that, this is one of those moments where it felt like a new process, like a doorway or something. And all of a sudden, I kind of let the legs go, and boom, through that sort of peripheral awareness, I felt the ankles and feet, right? So there's a lot of bones in the ankles and feet, and people don't often think about that. You know, if you touch your thighs and then your lower legs, that's 3 bones. But if you touch your feet, that's like, I think most counts say 52, but I think it's actually more like 56 if you count the sesamoid bones at the distal end of the first metatarsal, the big metatarsal, I think. So I think it's about 56. Anyways, it's a lot of bones, and it's like, that's a really interesting place to think about this bag idea. So I'm just relaxing my body. I feel my jaw start to relax, right? I'm kind of, oh, I want to sit up straighter. I don't even have the chat today. No one's been chatting. I'm like, I'll bring it out later when I get like more live viewers. So I'm feeling the foot, and I'm feeling almost like waves moving down through the bones of the foot. Now I have a lot of imagery built up of the way the bones of my foot are shaped and how they're placed and how that fits together. Not everyone will have that, but even just to feel like this is foot as that bag floating tubular image, and then even as I say this is foot, it's like, yeah, but the opposite too, which this is not just foot, like this is leg, right? This is part of the leg, you know? So to feel then the connection between like leg, what is leg? Leg is this pelvic half bone, leg bones and foot bones, right? And so to feel that now in a sense, in the sense of this floating bones, right? So it's a system of bones that's like floating in this like fluid tissue structure. It's cool. I'm just gonna let that feeling, because I have this very specific feeling that's arising right now in my right leg, and I feel a certain pressure to like stay with quote unquote viewer, but in another way, actually what I'm here to do and demonstrate is my process of being in my body, and to show that in a very clear, sort of open way, as much as the media allows. Anyways, so all that, and I lost the feeling. I'm just gonna feel it again. Ooh. Feels connected. It's nice. Feels very grounded. And very much grounded in the sense that one of my dance teachers once said to me, like, don't like press into the ground, just feel the connection to ground, right? That's something I've been working on in the past few years. Not trying to like push down through the floor, because like why would it, like I'm on the floor, why do I need to, you know, but to feel the connection to ground and therefore change my relationship to it, right? Which makes sense actually, that by attuning myself to the very proprioceptive realities of pressure underfoot, and then perhaps even to what I would call the energetic realities, or the continuum directional flow of your own sensation, which I think are the same thing. Then like that makes sense, because it's in line with all the stuff I'm talking about, right? Underlying movement and awareness, and like how does that affect our movement and essentially make us more of whatever it is we're trying to be. And that without any value judgment, like what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to run a marathon? Are we trying to be a software engineer? Are we trying to bang our head against a wall? You know, like whatever we're doing, I mean, do we want to do it better? Can we do it better? I'm interested in doing it better, right? So like, that's why I'm always working on this stuff. But yeah, it makes sense in the theory then that I could just like feel the leg and literally become more grounded and essentially find my way into a new or more efficient, perhaps, neurological pattern, right? And that the very way of doing that would be by feeling the momentums and weights and changing directions and vectors and movements in my body. But staying on that thing I talked about yesterday, that what I would call the edge of consciousness, the knife edge between past and present, and how there seems to be a way to do that, even kinesthetically, that allows for the most efficient, or more efficient perhaps, or a more subtly directed perhaps, or even more aware of the lack of like direction, but the being with the like falling of that pin I talked about, right? That it's like, this is us, and like which way, if you keep reducing that down to the very, you keep making this longer and longer, and then you look at the very tip and it's like, which way does it go? And it's just like almost a chance effect, that something like that could perhaps be much closer to free will, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the neuroscience is saying we make our decisions before we've even made them. So I don't really know. But I'm working to figure it out, right? And that's what I'm like thinking about and playing with as I move. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense that by feeling the ground, by feeling my body and bringing myself into the moment, that I could perhaps do something different. Without even saying better, but different, right? Like that's really sort of the interesting question here. And this way of thinking, I would say I learned from Eric Franklin, because he's really worked to codify a system of teaching imagery to people to help them change their bodies. And he's got like steps, and he's got a theory, and he's got this whole breakdown. It's very like organized and precise. And he's got this whole thing he calls the 4-step method to change. And it's like his 4 steps, whatever they are, I don't even, gosh, can I remember? I don't even remember. It's like identify, set a goal, try something, and then measure to see if it worked. I think that's what it is. He's like, if you do these steps and keep doing them, you will change, right? You will change your body. And that's cool. It's a really powerful idea. It's like really interesting, and it doesn't, at least from my perspective, it doesn't really weight any body type or any goal with one's body over any other goal. Like it could be, you could apply that to running the fastest marathon, or like decreasing back pain, you know, I think. And that's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily work for all thinking types. And I think that's what I found, is that I just tend to think differently. And so I started to gravitate away from the more systematic approach in my own work. And I also looked at different teachers, right? So I've looked at a number of teachers who use images, and they all use them in different ways, and they all implement them in different ways. So it's fascinating to see how and what people are doing. For me, the specific language, the timbre of their imagery, and how each of it affects me differently, right? And they do seem to have their own kind of flavors. Just like Victor has a style in drawing and Eric has a style in drawing, those kinesthetic responses in my own body have their own timbre. So now I'm going to think about my knee. So the knee, you've got this shin bone, and it's like if you are sitting and you touch your kneecap and you're just under your kneecap, and then you go a little lower and you feel bone again, like the first bone you feel, that's the top of your shin bone. And then there's like this plane like that right there, and then the end of the femur has these two balls. So there's these two balls, and they're resting on this surface of the shin bone. And you have the kneecap out front, but not even, no, actually, yeah, that's important too. And then you have the kneecap, it's kind of at this angle like this, and it's kind of like a boat. So you got the two balls of the femur, and then this little like boat resting, and it kind of changes its angle depending on how the leg moves. And then you've got like the water, right? I'm using this image now. You get the water, or the surface. I used to do this image of a ski jumper, and it's like changing the planes and stuff. Anyway, so it's cool. It's fun. But I like this one now. It's simpler. It's easier to feel. The other one takes a lot of like, you have to like work it out in your head how it works before you can really like feel it, at least for me. So I'm just imagining, I'm just kind of seeing that image, and I'm just kind of rocking my knee, my body. Like, there's the ocean, and then all of a sudden it feels as though that ocean in my knee and that image just started radiating throughout the body, and it's the tides of that ocean that are moving my body. And this is cool to like think about the internal ocean that we are essentially sailing. Like who was it that says, I don't know if it's Emily or if it was someone else, but Emily Conrad, she's like, you know, we left the ocean, but we brought the ocean with us, and now we hold it inside us. I found that when I first read her book, which was over 2 years ago, this idea of like fluids like that, and the gravity and the magnanimity and the immense vastness, and also the sort of strangeness or the unpredictability of movement that arises when you really get deep in that imagery is like, it was too much for me. I was like, what? And then I met Mary Abrams in New York, and she was a longtime student of Emily's, and now teaches using some of the same principles and new things that she brings in. And I think through seeing her body really become this moving sort of ocean-like thing, this thing that's just this moving, subtle, connected, like gyrating flow. I think that's what started to give me a feel, you know, just to be around someone moving like that, and they're so self-conscious, you know, because I think we all ultimately have these abilities to move in all sorts of ways, but we put those sort of social restrictions on. And this goes back to how we blend, right? Like as in relationship, how do we move with one another, and like how are we affecting one another? But just for me, it's like to even see someone doing it, it's like just sensual sort of like writhing movement. If you want to see what I'm talking about, look up Emily Conrad continuum movement. There's one video I can think of for sure where it's just, that was the first one I saw it. I was like, what am I looking at? I also saw Liz Koch do this movement. I don't think she ever did continuum, but it's very similar. And she actually, in talking about it, talked about her mentor. I don't remember who it was, but who was helping her to really like find this like yielding release in the psoas. And Liz teaches all about the psoas. She travels around doing workshops and getting people in touch with, you know, what most people consider like pretty relative to our core. And she's been like, I mean, you can read her book and it's pretty like, okay, that makes sense, yeah. But I mean, she wrote that a while ago, and I met her briefly in a workshop, like, it was about 2 years ago too. You know, this like, all this movement and of this form like came into my life at one moment. And it was all being represented by feminine bodies or female representing bodies, like women. Anyways, it's fascinating, and it's deep, and you can tell it's very, it's like, it feels very personal to watch something like that, or to even feel something like that. It feels very personal. It feels like they're sharing a part of themselves, which is really like unique and special and deep. And so in some sense, it almost feels as though the work itself, like seeing and what changes when I'm around something like that and I experience something, is not even necessarily like, oh, now I can do that, or like learning it or understanding it, but seeing the sort of the grace and permission that people offer themselves. And to see that, I mean, that's what's really powerful, I think. And that's Khalil Gibran, you know? That's the teacher doesn't teach you, but they bring you to the temple of your own wisdom. So when you're talking about a fluid system, right? And this came from me talking about the ocean of the knee. I'm going to do the other knee ocean so they feel more balanced, because I did like this whole leg of like the one image, and they did this knee of the other image, and now they're like weird. So I'm going to do the ocean and then the other leg, and then hopefully that'll kind of feel more balanced. So the ocean, I'm imagining the tibia, the femur, the kneecap, and the space, right? And the like viscous liquid fluid that's in there that separates and absorbs and affects all this, right? So I think something did slowly change in me around those times, and yeah, allow me to not even define, but to like take the first step on a very much longer path than like, you know, I think I knew actually at that time, but there were times when I used to step out on these paths thinking that I was gonna like be at the end, like there was like a definite end, you know, and then it always just seems like the path is the path. Like, you better like the path from the first step, because like the path is the path. And like the end goals, if the end goals are what are keeping you going, like, you know, it's just never gonna work. You know, work in some sense, but the path is the path. And that's the path that I think people are choosing a lot of times without really acknowledging it to themselves. You know, they're setting up a way of life, a pattern of movement. That's life. Life is movement. Setting up a pattern of movement that is in a mode that is not actually what they want. I see a lot of people doing that. And that's hard. And it's really hard because we're told that, I mean, we're really told that we have to have money to sort of exist in our bodies the way we want, right? Like, we have to have massage, and we have to pay for expensive classes, and we have to get the best nutrition and food, and that costs money, and everything just costs money. And so we've essentially been sold this lie, which is like the fundamental lie in some sense. Like, in some sense, it's how capitalism derives its power. And it's that the experience in your body, like your actual experience of being alive, is worse if you don't have these things that money can buy. And that is like, one, absolutely not true, I believe. I believe it's the simplest things that make life worth living. And our ability to enjoy those things determines our ability to enjoy everything. That's what I think. And I think that what we do is we set ourselves into this pattern of we don't have it. It's out there, and this is an idea, and it's an idea that's been sold to us, like literally sold to us. Like, buy this. You know, buy this idea that you need the things we can give you in order to have a good and fulfilling life, and not even morally good. Right? Like, they don't even advertise like that anymore because they know that doesn't drive anyone anymore. But like like a sensually good life, like a life you can actually enjoy. No problem, we got it for you. It's just, you know, shell it over. You know, and it's nothing against services and all the things you can do in the world. There's amazing things, and like I said, I believe in capitalism, but I do believe that we have to somehow take back control of our own feelings of worth and value in the body. And like, if we can't do that, we depend on someone to tell us what to do. If we can't do that, we depend on schools to tell us what to study and then what job to get, and we depend on the whims of a market to determine what that job will like do. And while all that's true, it's like we've told ourselves that through all of that, like our actual fulfillment and experience of life will be whatever is dictated to us. And I think a lot of the problem is that people are fighting themselves. They don't actually naturally gravitate to the space that the system has sort of provided for them with most ease. And so they end up fighting their own bodies. And the question is, like, how do we change that? And how do we change it without saying we need to like have everyone buy stuff or buy the time or buy the whatever? I don't know. Like, that's a really, I think, important social question right now. Okay, so now I'm really focusing on feeling that left leg in its fullness. Like, this is leg qua leg, pelvic half to toes. So I've got that sort of dual ocean sense now in my knee. I'm feeling leg qua leg, and now I'm actually going to draw the ocean sense into the front hip joints, right? So imagining that synovial fluid, right? It'd be this orientation, synovial fluid, and the shum, the bone's moving like this. It's kind of at this angle, and this socket's moving too because that bone's going to move a little bit, not a ton, but it'll move. And then this is rolling. And I'm imagining like the seawater, right? The ocean. And what else can I see? Like, you know, are these like swordfish, or is there like an octopus swimming past right out here, right? Can I feel like it's the currents of the ocean that are moving the leg, and the bone, once again, back is just floating, free suspended. And so now I'm relating this image of these sea caves, and these sea caves, all in this like sea foam green, there's like light cascading in my image. It's like not super deep, but then I can even change it and be like super deep, and there's like no light at all, and then like there's just these weird amorphous masses that like no human has ever laid eyes upon, that are moving in different ways like around, and it's just like still and silent. And this is the movement of this now is no longer the movement of tides flowing and like moving, you know, it could have been like seaweed or I don't know, it's just like something just like moving itself like in the flow. But then if I go to that darkness image, it's very much like the active pulsing of an organism, right? Which is really freaking different, which gives me a really interesting new feeling of my own body, right? And then all of a sudden I can like, I am the active floating organism in the dark sea with like the pounds and pounds of pressure, you know, that are around, and that there is no light penetrating, that you imagine there is no light, and the organism itself is simply moving because of the functions that it needs to stay alive. And like, who knows what they even eat down there. Like, I don't know, they eat other fish. Like, how do they see anything? I know there's those weird deep fish with lights, but they can't all have lights. They must have like really good sight or something. I don't know. I don't know how that works. Or maybe they hear. Yeah, maybe they hear and feel. That would make sense. Who knows? But so I'm thinking now about my pelvis and like my SI joints. I talk early on about the SI joints, but they are, I always say they're topographical. You know, they have like pieces and stuff. It's like, it's not like one smooth piece. It's not like a simple ball joint, or like a lot of your joints are like smooth, or if they're are in different planes or shapes, like they're still generally pretty smooth and kind of have like one sort of surface. But the SI, even though it does too, it's got like a little bit more of that going on, right? So there's more texture, and it's just from the shape. It's not a joint that is meant to like clearly just like slide smoothly, like, and like move far. Like maybe I shouldn't say slide smoothly, because smoothly seems great, but it doesn't move as much as a lot of other joints. And for years they said this joint wasn't even meant to move, right? That's a classic example, by the way, of like, it's a really important, yeah, I'm just gonna say it because it's a really important thing that I use as a metaphor or framework. So for however many years, the most educated people in the world said this joint back here didn't move. Now, if you were really asking that question, which I have to assume some of them were, if you're really asking that question in just like what I would consider just like looking around the world and seeing what's going on, then I don't know. I mean, I guess there were cultures where they walked around and like never moved or like hid those places. But I just feel like just to walk or watch a normal person walk, like you can see that joint moves. So, I mean, that's the first thing to me. But the second thing is it's a joint. Like, if that wasn't meant to move, why wouldn't it just be one bone? I mean, seriously, because the sacrum is fused bones, like the pelvic halves are fused bones. Why wouldn't the pelvic halves themselves are fused bones and the sacrum are fused bones, right? Like all these bones like fuse together to create one bone and then one bone. The pelvic halves are 3 bones, and then the sacrum is normally like 5, and they fuse, and then there's a joint between them. But if there wasn't supposed to be movement, then why wouldn't they fuse, right? So I don't think this is really a question people are asking anymore, and I don't even know how long ago it was that they were asking. I mean, when I look, it seems like it wasn't that long ago, but I don't have a great sense on the pulse of all the shifts in the scientific thinking. But that's a moment, and it's paradigmatic, or it's an important thing to look at, because I think from any point of common sense, I mean, not any, right? But like from the perspective of common sense, you would say, well, that is a joint and it should move. It moves clearly. But the most educated people were saying it didn't. It's interesting. I am not one to throw out science in any way, shape, or form. And I talk about really kind of out there stuff sometimes. Stuff that like seems a little bit like woo-woo or disregarding of science. But I think science is super important. However, I do subscribe to a view of science based on Thomas Kuhn, and this idea that, well, science is ultimately statistical. It's statistical analysis, and really we're just replacing paradigms with paradigms because we need a useful way to explain the world. And what makes a paradigm relevant or apt is its ability to give us solutions for the things that we consider anomalies, right? Because we want to understand the world, right? And this is what Kuhn says. And so then I go think about Winston Churchill, who said, he uses a lamppost, let's see, he uses statistics like a drunkard uses a lamppost, more for support rather than illumination. Right? And Churchill was a man of his times, you know, more than, well, as much as all of us, but Churchill was a man of his times, and the world needed like him to do the things he did, and he was, you know, a man of action, clearly. And so he has a specific view about statistics, and statistics are super valuable, and ultimately I think we're all determining, like one of the big sort of value decisions that people make that affect how they're living is how they relate to statistics and what like margin of error or margin of safety they feel comfortable with negotiating. And that's in itself is a super interesting like question. How do people derive that, right? But basically it's like, well, that option might work and this one will like definitely work, or I'm pretty sure it will work, and that one I'm like 10%, that one I'm like 90, right? And the question is, you know, people say, well, like how much risk can you tolerate, right? But I don't even like that description. Like in my embodied sense and my feeling sense of those words, I don't, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are ways to, I think, I mean, actually what I really think is we're all ultimately staying safe. Like that we all ultimately, as organisms that are alive and are homeostatic, we are governing our decisions to be safe and to stay alive. But there's something different. Like some people are like risk takers and some aren't, right? Some will like do these things, or like in any sense of that word, right? Like some people might do something physically daring, or some people might do something emotionally daring, or all sorts of different things, right? And I do think that is a lot of it is that the way we make that determination about statistics, essentially, like what are all the past experiences I know, both what people have told me, what's happened to me, all these different things, and we compile them in some way, and then we determine like statistical possibility. Yeah, so I don't know. I just think there's a way that when we tap into our feeling, we're still looking for safety the same as anyone else, and we're also like, at least for me, I feel like it kind of changed at some point in my life. I like allowed myself to trust and tune into my own feeling, and what happened was, this is what I'm trying to describe. What happened was I just felt like more in tune with the world. Like I could feel things in a different way. Like, I don't know exactly what that means, but like when I went to listen to music, it was like, and I danced, it was like I could feel it moving me in a different way versus listening to it and like moving my body, right? It was more immediate, like that idea of expression. It felt like I was feeling the expressions of the things around me. And, I'm like been balancing those SIs. I'm gonna actually shift the image to using that ocean image. Now I'm seeing like fish swimming up. It's more like coral reef level now. So, where was I? Where was I? So yeah, my suspicion is, because it's what I found in my own life, that we're kind of blocking our feeling in various ways for various reasons. I talk about those at different times and like theorize about those at different times. But we're all feeling, which is a really large part of how we're determining what we're doing. Like this proprioceptive idea, this interoceptive idea, like we can't necessarily see the corollary between I'm feeling my heartbeat and I'm becoming a better trader, right, in the markets. But it's there. Science has shown it's there. It's like, it's there. Wow, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? And so I think there is a way that we can tune more deeply into our feeling, and then we can, it's like feel the forces, right? We can feel the forces moving. So just like I'm imagining a kayaker, like a pro kayaker in this big whitewater thing, to a lot of people, they would look at that and they would be like, that's an insane risk, and they would never get in the boat, right? Totally legitimate life choice. You look at the kayaker though, and they're like, yeah, but you don't understand, like I can feel, like it looks like chaos perhaps to the untrained eye, but to the person who's in there and who's trained and who's done and taken the time and understood the river and understood their equipment and understood their body, they can feel all these forces and navigate this whole thing. And what appears unsafe is actually, for them, highly safe, right? Or they wouldn't be doing it, right? Because I don't think bodies just like, I mean, I do actually, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't think most people are suicidal, basically. I think that when most people do things that are daring, they're not being suicidal, they are feeling the forces within them and navigating that in ways that, to people who are not feeling those forces or do not travel in that same current, right, in that kayak, like I can never know what that kayaker like feels and doing. And that's sort of why it's so awe-inspiring, I guess, is not only to see the feat, but to understand the connection to the forces around and within, and the ability to interpret them in a way that like not only keeps them alive, but is like a thing of beauty perhaps, or whatever reason they're kayaking. Oh man. Okay, I'm gonna bring that ocean image into the spine now. So I'm seeing like all the vertebrae, you know, just kind of resting and floating in this tubular bag structure. Now I'm seeing the shoulder girdle and the hands, but I'm not really seeing my ribs, so I'm going to bring the ribs, the awareness to the ribs a little more, and they're kind of staying dim in my mind's eye, so I'm just going to take some time to move. My friend asked how I was doing. I walked in and I was like racing to get on the stream, and he was like, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm closing. We've been talking about Glengarry Glen Ross, and I've been watching Casey Neistat, and I was like, I don't know, am I good, am I bad? Like, I don't know, but I'm doing this thing. Like, I'm gonna be on camera. I said so. It's 7:30, it's 7:28. So it's funny to watch that sort of embodiment, which is a whole other and interesting sort of embodiment. And I think that is really the embodiment that we see behind entrepreneurs. I don't think it's actually like this like mystical, magical thing that it sometimes seems like. Like we look at the entrepreneurs, and in some sense it is. I'm just thinking about, I was listening to, what is his name? Anyways, so I was thinking about, hang on, I gotta focus on this. Sometimes I just think I talk too fast for myself, and I gotta like slow down, feel the connections of my body, because it's like, in my experience, it's very much the connections of my body that are helping me connect my own thoughts. And it's like if a cognitive line of thinking starts to get muddy or muddled, I go and I feel my body and I follow whatever bodily process I'm already in. It's another thing I started to do in the past few years, which people find really weird sometimes. Like I'll be really quiet and focus on like what I'm feeling sometimes, and I won't, I mean, I can like talk about it, but oftentimes the talking will pull me out of the process I'm in. And so people can get triggered because you're like, you're not talking about it, you're not talking about it, you're not telling me. And I don't know, I have the same, sometimes I get frustrated for that with people. But I have noticed that sometimes I need to just kind of be in the physical, because in some sense, right, and this is it, this is the paradigm, this body and these movements are the very thoughts I'm having, because they're arising contemporaneously, right? That's kind of going on a limb, and that's kind of just an idea, but it does seem to make sense that experience is a continuum of everything we're experiencing, right? And you can look at the spiritual, you can go to the Buddhist sort of explanation of the senses and what's happening and how it connects into like, being, or you can look at just your general experience and break it down in common sense, or you can look at, really, I'd say neuroscience. But I mean, the neuroscience isn't making that really leap yet, is the thing, right? Like, I look at the studies and I see it through this paradigm or framework that I think makes sense, that I've learned in other places. But like, I don't see the neuroscience, like it's, in many ways, I think the neuroscience is still struggling with anomalies. And like Kuhn says that when paradigms fall, anomalies start arising more and more and more, which is in some sense, and this is me, not Kuhn, in some sense saying that like this paradigm doesn't serve us anymore. Like, it doesn't explain enough. We're going to keep looking at the edges. Like, he says that when one falls, it's always replaced by something, that there's never like a gap in paradigm. Probably because like we are not able, I think perhaps, to live in a world which is like unknown. Like, we have to have a working paradigm to explain our world. And then in some sense, the establishment of paradigms is like emotional in that sense, but also physical, right? Because it's all connected. And I don't know, like, I don't get all that, but I sometimes think about like Reiki and armoring, and that maybe it's the specific quality of armoring that would arise in different times in peoples, giving rise to different thought. And right, you think about the rise of this kind of technology and globalism and what that's doing to people's bodies, and how we're creating a new global culture of bodies, you know? I mean, I think that's going to take a long time, and in some sense maybe it'll never happen, but I do think it's going that way. And you know what? Now I'm going to go back to Bonnie's last principle, because I wouldn't say that bodies should be any certain way. I really don't mean to say that when I say that sentence, except maybe in this sense, maybe. And I don't even know if I go this far, but she says, Principle 15, discovering verticality. We are still discovering neutral pelvic alignment with our sits bones, settling vertically downward without the sit bones tilting backward or local tucking under of the pelvis. The vertical alignment of the pelvic halves is essential for vertical alignment of the head and spine, which are suspended between the two pelvic halves. So you should totally do this image in terms of alignment, but the reason I brought that up was like, maybe that's the sense, like we're getting closer to like upright bipedal posture. That's pretty cool. I mean, most people assume we're like kind of there, like we're it, and she's saying like, no one really knows. And in the world of geeky biomechanics, there's a lot of disagreement about what is neutral pelvis. Like, how is the pelvis supposed to rest? Like, why does it rest differently in these people, or with those people, or with these people, or with that people? What does that mean? What is it? What is this? What is that? And I've never heard anyone say, besides Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, that like, we're still figuring it out. I don't know, maybe people do. But most of the time I hear people tell me like, oh, this is how it works. I really prefer the like, we're still figuring it out. It feels more liberating. It's like, oh, right, I can trust my own sensation, right? Like, whichever's right or wrong, it's not even, to me, about that so much. In this case, at least, it's about like what is more useful, what opens up more space and possibility and freedom. So now I'm feeling, Bonnie does this thing where she draws a line between the two sit bones, and then she draws a line from coccyx to pubis. So it's this cross section that's dividing the pelvic floor into quarters. And then she's like, okay, try moving and changing the relationship of all the four quarters in like the different ways, right? Like, you can do all that, right? It's just, I've got that image, that cross section in my mind, and I'm just like, right now I'm really just kind of, well, I'm using each leg in different ways, right? But I'm kind of isolating these feelings of legs and feeling that, like, how is it that my legs connect? Remember the other day I was being silly, I was going down a rabbit hole, but it's funny, you know, I do that for effect. Like I'm saying something in the way I say something. But it's like, you know, how do we go from one column to two columns to one? Like, what the heck is going on? Like, that's really, from an embodiment perspective, from a felt sense, that's such an interesting question. Because if you really think about it and you touch your pubic bone, he's touching his pubic bone on camera. Oh my goodness. So you touch your pubic bone, this is where your legs meet. This is like the only place your legs meet, which is wild, right? Because you're going toe to pelvic half, right? Okay, cool, got it. 2 legs, right? 2 sit bones on the chair. Okay, those are each different legs. Like if I move right sit bone, that's right leg. If I move left sit bone, that's left leg. Move both sit bones, certainly a relationship, right? Wait, they must be touching, right? Where are they touching? Well, they're not really. They connect to the SI joint, which connects to the sacrum, which is spine. So your tailbone is spine, and your or the bottom of your head is spine. Like spine, legs, right? Interesting, 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 interesting. So I can think about them connecting in the back, not with each other, but with the base of the spine. I'm like, oh, okay, so I can move the spine, and that is moving through the legs, and I can move the legs, and that moves through the spine, and I can change these relationships. Can I do it staying soft and fluid, or do I like get tense in the different ways I do it, bringing that ocean imagery back? And okay, so I've got this sacrum, and it's like a triangle, and my tailbone's right here, and then up here is like where my spine begins, like my spine, the what people call spine, like L5, but it goes all the way to the tail, really. They're just fused, and they just connect to the legs, so they're a little different. So, oh, okay. Ooh. Oh. But the legs do connect, right? So I can think about it in the back, but the legs actually touch at the pubic bone, because the pubic bone is the joining between the 2 pelvic halves, which are leg, right? So my legs are touching just above my genitals. Whatever body type I am, my legs are touching just above my genitals. Huh, interesting, you know? Like, think about that, feel that. So now I'm wobbling, very different, right? Very different to think about, okay, they're connected up here. Like, wait, but if I'm back here, this is leg, yeah, and if I trace that down in the back on the side, this is leg, and if I go to the sit bone, this is leg, but this is where it connects to the other leg, right? It's the front of the pelvic half, and I can touch the pelvic half in all different parts, and it's the front that's connecting to the other front of the pelvic half. Super cool. It makes more sense in a quadrupedal position to me, because then like it would be hanging, right? The pubic bone. It's like pubic bone would be now hanging down, and it's like together like this, and then like the legs are coming up and they're pushing into the spine, right? And that makes sense. But then when I sit or I go bipedal, upright, this gets like, I still don't understand this. Like, I've been thinking about this for years now, and I'm just like, and when I say understand, like, I get the way the forces flow, like, I understand the idea, I understand the concept, but I don't understand. I don't kinesthetically really feel how this works. And so this is an exploration. So I'm going to just think about the other, like, okay, the leg attaches up here to the other leg. Like, that leg attaches to that leg through this point. And this is part of that leg, and this is part of that leg. But they attach here. right? So I'm feeling okay. I feel the sit bone, feel the PSIS, the like back side, just behind the SI joint. Now I really feel, okay, that front connection, and now I'm gonna really feel that back connection. I noticed I was like holding my spine, my low back in a way. So I'm gonna release that, and I lose focus on the front connection. So I'm gonna draw the focus back, pubic bone, ocean, tides, waves, like living things around me. I am a living thing in the ocean, right? So I'm using these images. I have the ocean in my joints, in my bones, in these fluid systems traveling through my body. That is the ocean. So the ocean is outside, the ocean is inside, right? I am still surrounded by fluid even if I'm not in the ocean. I'm surrounded by air. And the weight of that air keeps me together. The weight of the air is holding me together. If you just lifted all the air off me, everything inside me would now explode out to balance the environment, homeostasis, right? Like we are like this tiny spectrum of fragility. If you look at all of like the possibility of life and all of the possibility, right? This is why it's such a big deal. If we can find a planet with the environment that could sustain life, it's like, that's a big deal. Because it's a lot of balancing factors. So I'm feeling the front of my pelvis. Feeling that connection. Feeling the softness between the pubis bone. So the pubis is one of the three bones that fuses to form the pelvic calf. So it's like where the pubic bone, right, the pubic symphysis really connects, and then like a V down, which I can't really make that with my hands unless it were this side, it would be like that. But you should just look it up. But then it V's down and it goes towards the sit bone. It's fusing with the ischium. Sit bones go by the name ischial tuberosities, based on the name ischium, the bone, the ischium. So anyways, anatomy language is sometimes like frustrating to learn, but it's all like built on itself, and it's actually pretty useful. Like there's a reason people still use it, because I can say things like the distal head of the first metatarsal, and like you can know what that is, and that's useful. And you can know where that is no matter what direction I am in space, right? Because if I said top or bottom, but if my legs are in the air, it's different, right? So it's like cardinal directions within the locus of the body, within the ocean of the body. So I'm feeling my pubic bone and the quadrants. Ooh, noticing they don't feel quite balanced, so I'm going to balance them a bit, and that balancing draws my posture into a different place, right? And so interesting, it drew me right back up to sitting. All I focused on was the quadrants. So now what if I start to bow back down and notice the movement and the change, both in shape and qualitatively in the muscles, in the tissue of the quadrants. Like, how are they changing in relation? Super interesting question. Now my attention is drawn to my fibular head. That would be the proximal fibular head, right below my knee joint. It's really a part of my knee joint, but it's not in the clear like bone-to-bone connection, because it's connecting down below to the tibia. The knee is actually a really cool joint like that, because it's like a lot of planes and a lot of joints and a lot of spaces, and they all have to move in relation to one another well for it to work well. And if any of them kind of stick or get locked, everything is gonna get cattywampus. Or really, everything's going to remain perfectly logical, perfectly rational. Homeostasis, like the body organizes itself based on what it finds to be, literally finds to be the safest route, right? Like that's what I really think that. I'm not sure I could ever prove that, but it just makes sense. It's the corollary of saying like everyone wants to be happy. Like everyone wants to be like safe and alive, you know? Like I feel like these are core tenets that we should allow for all people. And then that's like a big question, right? What does that mean? How do we do that? And that's really like some of the work I'm trying to do here, actually. Like that's like some of the philosophical underpinnings. I'm fascinated by the body and movement, but I really do believe that if we continue to really feel ourselves and be with ourselves, that we naturally gravitate, just like me being like, oh, I'm gonna balance the quadrants of the pelvic half, like brings me to up. I think that we naturally gravitate towards the life that makes most sense for us when we feel ourselves. Because then we're just in tune with like what we really want, not in the sense of this, but in the sense of this. You know? So my legs are feeling balanced. I'm looking back into my feet now, and I'm actually looking at the tarsal bones into the metatarsal bones. And some of the far end of the tarsal bones. So the tarsal bones are these different cubes in the back half of my foot. They are the wrist bones. Talked about wrist bones early on. Right, there's a bunch of wrist bones right here. Those are the carpal bones. Those are the tarsal bones. Right, it starts to make more sense. And then I'm thinking about those in relation to the place where the bone essentially changes from one column. I mean, you could say to 2 to 5, or you could just say 1 to 5. I'll talk about the 2 to 5 later, but the 1 to 5, right? Like that. I mean, in another sense, you could say two because of, I guess the most obvious sense is to say 2 columns because of the tibia and the fibula. But in another sense, like the tibia really bears the weight, like most of the weight. And the fibula does this separate action of balancing. And while they are totally 2 bones and connected, like this still kind of, even just from visual sight, for most people really still looks like 1 column, right? So there's like, whatever, it doesn't matter exactly how you're viewing it. Each of them will give you a different effect, a different feeling. But then it sort of goes down, and then at some point it's like clearly 5. You know what I mean? Like it ends in 5 completely separate by skin columns, whereas this isn't separated by skin. There's an argument for that, like 1 into 5. And like, how does that happen? Well, that really starts happening at these metatarsal bones. And those are your long bones, basically like these parts of your hand, right? Kind of like, they're like extensions of your fingers, right? And so you can really feel like, oh, my fingers go way back down to here, right? Your toes go way back up to here, like basically halfway in your foot, the top of your arch. And so you've got all these bones which are really distributing the weight, and it's really interesting when we get into like how you could see this as different pathways of weight in here through the tarsal bones. That's a really interesting exploration, and we'll definitely do that. But you can also just see how, okay, like they all kind of fit together as like a puzzle, and then they like emerge as these 5 columns, right? So you've got all these bones which like wobble and move in different ways in here. Those are the tarsal bones. And then you have those 5 columns. So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about, ooh, got a little cramp. I'm thinking about the relationship between the tarsal bones and the metatarsal bones. The joint, like the ocean image, right? Whew, man, those are some muscles that do not, I mean, I think they get a lot of work. Like I wear these barefoot sandals every day, practically. But I still feel like these bones, like in my arch, in the center of my arch, don't get enough work. And I've been thinking that about a lot of people. I think that's what happens is our modern footwear, we're so obsessed with soles and the protection they offer that we often don't pay attention to the rigidity that comes along with that. Even if it's soft, it's often like really rigid and kind of holds our foot in this like position. And I think we don't end up using or really developing the muscles in the arches of our feet, which are really important. So in a worst case, you see someone with collapsed arches, and that's like, I mean, it's serious. Those bones have like morphed and gone into different like places, and they have a whole different design of the foot, which also seems to me perfectly intelligent. But there does seem to be like a way that most of us would think it is designed. There's just like certain forces and factors that would make it need a different design, right? And that's like what would happen if someone had arches that fell. So I'm like working with these forces, right? And I'm thinking about that, and I'm feeling, okay, tarsal bones, and here's where the tarsals split into 5, like the little like cubes and shapes. Like just look at an image on Google, at those back half of the bones or the foot, and then it goes into 5. And can I get movement and access that place in my foot using the ocean image? Hey. Man, that is a freaking workout in my foot. Really a great way to do this kind of work is with a TheraBand. Yeah, Eric does that, and you can even like buy his videos, and he'll show you the exercises and give you some imagery and stuff. It's pretty cool. But just to feel those parts of the feet, oh my gosh, it's like my foot starts shaking. It's like, oh, enough, Jonathan. Needed to go to workout school for my feet. Amy Matthews is Bonnie's longtime student, and she's got her own projects and her own embodied anatomy that you can look up and purchase. And I've seen her feet do like this inchworm thing. She can literally like, as though she can take the whole arch and just do like that. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, you just like do it while you're watching TV. You just like practice. It takes practice. It's like, whoa. Anyway, so I definitely, even though I wear my barefoot sandals, don't think I really am working the center of my arches enough. My transverse tarsal joint. My connection between the 5 rays of my foot and the tarsal bones. Wait, transverse tarsal is... I have to go back and look up exactly what they call transverse tarsal. I forget if that's, because I don't think that's, I think that's further back. I think you've got where the metatarsals connect, and then further back is transverse tarsal, like cuboid. I think it's like cuboid calcaneus? But how does... The problem here is that I've built this 2-pathway image into my foot for so long that when I look at the foot now, I largely see heel foot and ankle foot, which is specific descriptions of the weight. So they say that like one pathway of weight is more through the heel and one is more through quote unquote the ankle. What they really mean is the talus. And then when you look at that, that starts to, I mean, most of it is still going through the tibia, but even the heel foot, which would be the outside of the foot, feels more related to the fibula. So it's kind of like the whole outside and the whole inside. And there's different ways those travel, but the transverse tarsal is super important, I think, for pronation and supination. So I should identify where that is again. Anyways, I'm basically working on this area of my foot, like kind of around here to here. I'm working on flexing it and extending it, and now I'm working on rotating it and twisting it. And it's basically combining those motions, which will form pronation and supination. People often think it's just like the wobbling of the heel or something. Like they'll say, oh, he's over pronating, like you see his heels falling in or whatever. Or what would it be? Yeah, I think so, yeah. But it's actually, it's more complex. It's a spiraling action that's the foot is designed to do, because people like try to avoid it, right? Like we're not supposed to do it. Like no, it's a spiraling action in the foot, which is how your foot actually works. It's how it's designed. It's how it's made. If you just pick up a bone model of a foot that's connected with like elastic, you can turn it one way and the bones will like get tighter, and you can turn it the other way and the bones will like open up and get looser. And that's pronation and supination. So it's like receiving and then like pushing off forces. So it's like receiving the earth and pushing off. Yeah, so that's really important, and these muscles are crucial in that. So I'm going to do it the other side. I'm so balanced today. I'm so like, I'm going to do this side and that side. Some days I'm just wandering. Some days I'm just more like methodical. Whew. So I'm imagining the feeling of that like saline tidal flow in my feet. The feeling of yielding the bones of my foot into gravity, as Bonnie talks about. Combining those, it's like, whoa, when I combine those two feelings, my foot starts to feel like, it's like even hard to maintain, but it starts to feel like something I don't normally feel, or like I've never even felt before, I don't know. But it's like, ocean, saline water, and yielding bones. Ocean, saline water, saline tide, is that what I said? A saline tidal flow. Saline tidal flow. And a yielding of the bones. Saline tidal flow and the yielding of the bones. Saline tidal flow, the yielding of the bones. I'm just going to feel my feet on the earth now.